Cody Plofker is back on the Andrew Ferris podcast. Hello and welcome to the show. Last time Cody came on the show, it was my most popular episode ever. It actually ran past all of my other episodes. And so obviously, being the content creator that I am, who's just in it for the numbers 100%, I had to get Cody back so I could get those downloads and those views. No, I'm kidding. What that told me actually is that people just really liked that conversation and were really helped by it. And so obviously what I want is to be as helpful as possible. And so today on the show, I brought Cody back. He graciously gave me more of his time so that we could chat some more about what's on our mind as marketers. Today on the show, Cody, the CMO and CRO, both at Jones Road Beauty, which is a monster e-commerce, but really omni-channel brand now in the beauty space. Cody and I are going to talk about aMER versus contribution margin, how we're using that to measure success. We're going to talk about forecasting, and we're going to argue viciously about whether or not direct response advertising is a good way to think about advertising right now. The tension is, even on the intro here, is really thick. So be ready for Cody and I to just berate one another. So not really. Cody's great, and we will perhaps present some differing opinions on that. Let's not delay. You know Cody. I don't need to introduce him anymore. Let's jump in.
Thank you, because I hate intros, but super excited to be back. It was really cool to get a lot of positive feedback on the first one. And of course, I always love being number one. So let's see if I can come to that number two spot as well.
Yeah.
1 and 2 back to back.
The funny thing is, for a long time, Isaac Medeiros' episode that he did with me, I'll link it in the show notes, but Isaac's episode with me where he...
No, don't link it. I don't want that to get views.
Isaac did an episode with me a while back. He'll never catch up because that was in my pre-YouTube days. So now I get 2 channels versus one. But Isaac for a long time was my number one episode. And actually, he had already been passed. But the moment that he saw on Twitter or whatever that you had passed him, he immediately DM'd me. He was like, "I'm coming back. I'm going to take over number one."
That's great. Yeah,
that episode is really good. It's him talking about the
good.
insane content machine he built to get to $10 million in revenue with $0 in ad spend, which is remarkable. So go listen to that. It's crazy. But Isaac's an insane guy. But I'm glad you're back. It's funny that it has come since we kind of rescheduled this. The notion of you and I are just going to fight or something. The whole time. So
I love it.
Yeah. Why do you hate intros? Why'd you say that?
I don't know. I just feel like a lot of podcasts are the same, where it's just you tell me your backstory, and it's 15 minutes to get into your childhood and what school you went to. And it's people just want to hear us talk about Facebook ads and growth. So let's just get straight into it.
Yeah, that's funny. That's really funny. Yeah, that's a good point. I bet you're right about that. But people are annoyed. Skip. Just go forward. Okay, let's get into it then. So let's start. There's a few things we could talk about. But you actually said when we were talking before we started something about how I had pushed on something last time we talked, and of course I'll link that episode in the show notes as well. But last time we were talking pretty tactical about cost controls and meta ads and that kind of stuff. But we got into a little short conversation there about contribution margin versus aMER, and you said that had spurred some thoughts for you. So maybe just use that as a jumping off point. What were the thoughts that it spurred for you, and what are you doing with that and thinking about?
Yeah, of course. So I guess when we were last year, we had kind of always optimized for margin, and margin being a percentage, an MER and aMER. So we would have a target MER and target aMER that we would have, and we forecast that on a annual, monthly, weekly, daily basis. And I don't really think that is the best way to operate, depending on what your goals are. I think we've been really fortunate that we have had incredible growth, and we haven't really had to choose between growth and profitability. And obviously, a lot of our industry has changed, and now everyone is really focusing on it. We're almost coming at it from the other perspective, where I think we were, so lean and so profitable, and for us to continue to grow and stabilize the business, we actually might accept a lower margin. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to grow at the expense of profitability, right? And that's very possible to do, to create more revenue and actually produce less profit. And so, in talking through this stuff and presenting scenarios to our board, it kind of hit me based on, a conversation we had, some stuff that, Taylor's put out there that is just all else being equal, assuming fixed costs are truly fixed, the way you maximize profit is to maximize contribution margin. And just a quick disclaimer, most things in finance, margin as a percentage, contribution margin for whatever reason is a dollar amount. So I mean the dollar amount, not the percentage. And so I just had this aha moment, because I even presented 2 forecasts to the board with 2 scenarios just to look for some guidance on, this was probably back in October, look for some guidance on kind of growth trajectory and plans, and what our strategy is in terms of how much do we grow And are we willing to accept a lesser return? And, showed that we could probably hit like the same EBITDA number with multiple. And they were kind of like, well, what's the point? And like, after reflecting on it, like it just really hit me. Like I didn't have a great answer to that. And it's, again, all else being equal, the goal of marketing is to maximize contribution margin dollars. So you want to keep fixed costs low, and you want to maximize that. And really, regardless of whatever your MER, aMER is. So we still forecast MER, aMER. It's no longer our North Star. This is, I guess, the first month. We kind of played around with it in December, but this is really the first month where we really have, I don't like the word North Star because I think usually people talk about it in terms of like attribution and there's no one thing. But I guess really in terms of like having a marketing team just focused on hitting a daily and monthly contribution margin number has been like incredibly refreshing. And again, it's early, but like it's so nice to just really have one number to focus on and go from there.
So there's a lot there that I really love. Can you, just for people who don't know, can you quickly define those three terms and acronyms? I think probably most people listening know, but aMER, MER, and contribution margin. What do you mean by each?
So MER is a marketing or media efficiency ratio. It's essentially revenue divided by spend. So it's just what percentage of your revenue you are spending on ads totally.
Basically a P&L metric, right? It's like essentially bakes your entire ad spend against your total revenue and uses a percentage.
Yeah. And any of these, again, everyone's going to do them differently. You can do just paid media spend, or you can do all marketing costs. We kind of calculate MER, just paid media, but we also have, like, when we do contribution margin, we have just paid media, but we also have all spend that we look at like monthly and just have different. But because you get paid media stuff so much quicker, so it's easier to get. So that's MER. aMER is similar, but just looking at new customer revenue. So this might be equivalent to like a blended ROAS. This is revenue from new customers divided by spend. That's, to me, our biggest KPI in terms of attribution and how how efficient our spend is at acquiring new customers. And then you have contribution margin. And again, so those are both percentages, right? So they're not looking at total dollar amounts. And, a lot of people say you can't cash percentages in the bank, right? So total dollar amounts are more important. Contribution margin is, feel free to correct my definition if you have a better one.
Well, no, people have disagreements about this, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's essentially what's left over after all variable costs. So, you have variable and fixed costs in your business. Variable cost is anything that is more or less a one-for-one with revenue. As revenue goes up, this goes up, and a fixed cost stays relatively the same. So, fixed costs might be personnel, rent, insurance, things like that. Now, yes, if you're a $1 million business versus 100, they are very different. But if you go from 1 to 2, they actually might not change. Variable cost might be something like shipping to get orders, COGS, things like that. And so after all of your variable costs, so the way I think about it is like you have gross margin, which is just your COGS, right? So if you take your revenue minus your COGS, that's gross margin, then like landed gross margin, that's what to get it to somebody's door. So that's all other variable costs that are not marketing. So that might be your Shopify fees, your payment processing, your shipping, your 3PL fees. That is a really important number to know because that tells you what you can spend to acquire a customer and break even. And then you subtract marketing or paid media from that, and that gives you contribution margin. And again, a lot of times it's percentage, but dollars. So really our goal now is we want to maximize that contribution margin dollars, because if fixed costs are truly fixed and those are staying the same beginning of the month, then the best way for us to guide the ship and land at the best profit possible with the right combination of volume and efficiency is to maximize contribution margin.
Yeah. That's really helpful. There's a simple illustration of the point here, which is that if I spend $1 in advertising and I generate $100, I've now got a 100 MER. Amazing, right? 100 MER, an incredible metric. Okay. But the problem is that's actually much worse than if I spend $100,000 and I generate let's call it $2,000 of contribution margin, right? So not just revenue, but actual contribution margin, right? Or not 102,000. Let's call it $2,000 of contribution margin, right? So if I could actually generate a very thin percentage return, but actually generate quite a few more contribution dollars along the way. And the thing is, as you alluded to, and that right, percentages don't pay bills. And so the problem that I have seen sometimes is that people start getting into a mentality where they optimize for a metric that is an efficiency metric, when in fact, they ought to optimize for contribution dollars. And you could even take this another step further and say there may be even some consideration for LTV-based contribution dollars, because there's actually another layer to this. And I'm actually curious how you guys process this. If you have I've seen this.
I actually have a debate with you on this one. I have a debate with you on that one.
Okay, great. Let's argue.
Stance.
Well, okay, yeah. So I've talked to a couple of clients recently.
Yeah.
And I should be clear, these clients have extreme levels of LTV, extremely high levels, like very high subscription-oriented brands, right? But there are a couple brands I've talked to recently that measure their performance on a daily contribution margin target. And so they say, we want to hit a certain amount of contribution margin. But there's a problem here, which is that I actually it may be a better use of my money to spend at a number that lowers my daily contribution margin performance, but actually increases my total contribution margin over a longer time horizon. And in order to get there, let me try and illustrate this. Let's say I have customers who produce $5 in LTV over the course of a year after producing, let's say an initial $1 on day one of their purchase. Okay. So essentially there's $5 additional after the first dollar they produce. It may be in my best interest to spend at a loss or at like straight up break even, like lose money on COGS, whatever, where I would spend at a loss today, bring my contribution dollars down today, right? In fact, the more successful I am, the more money I'm able to spend at a CAC target that's a loss, the lower my contribution margin is going to look. So it's going to make it look worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. But over time, I might produce a 200% annualized return on those dollars. And like imagine you had a stock that you could where it's like, you could borderline guarantee a 200% return. And let's call it the risk on that return annualized was that it came in at 50%. Like you actually may have that much worse. So now your return is on the downside down to 100% annualized return. Okay. Like in that world, it is still completely rational for you to go freaking take out as much debt, go put a HELOC on your house and plow as much money as you possibly can come up with in cash today to go get those people and get a return over a longer period of time. Because 6 months from now and 9 months from now and a year from now is coming. It's coming. It's going to be here, and those customers will come back.
You think it's coming. You think it is. You plan for it to. You don't know.
You don't. But you can also reasonably assume some level of risk and calculate what the level of risk is. And so to some degree, right? And you could even take that on an extreme level. So the point that I'm making is that to come back to your earlier point, I totally agree with you. Like contribution dollars is actually a better measure than an efficiency metric over time. And my actual approach would be to just measure both, like you just said, right? You may switch to
we still do them. It's just hierarchy of them. And by the way, I don't know if I felt really smart or really stupid when I figured it out because it's so simple. Like if you think about it and communicate it, it is so simple, but like the clarity it has given me. And again, we did, $100 million last year. So it's like we did that not ideally. Maybe we could have done more, but like the clarity it has given me to like really have like a North Star and just to really think about like what we're optimizing for has been like really refreshing. It's so simple, but it is that important.
But yeah, I mean, the simple idea, and I think actually it was Taylor who put this way once, but it's like the profit in your business is like your contribution margin minus your fixed costs, like that simply. Mm-hmm. So if your fixed costs really are fixed and your contribution margin goes up, it's more profit. It just goes straight to the bottom line of your business it's a helpful thing. Okay. So anyway, the point being like, optimizing for contribution dollars really helps, but there can even be that. I think this is where it actually does need to dovetail, in my view, with an intelligent forecast in terms of how to do this. Now, the situation I just laid out a second ago, 500% LTV in a year is freaking extreme. Like so few brands can actually do that. But go ahead, argue with me.
All right. So I think notwithstanding the zero interest rate businesses that, were just focused on growth, right? Can we agree that everybody is focused on producing enterprise value by having positive growth, but with maximum EBITDA dollars, right?
Yeah.
So we're still trying to maximize EBITDA. Yeah.
Right. You and I are both assuming here that the way to maximize the value of your business, which is what you mean by enterprise value, right? Like the sellable value of the business, the way to maximize that is to produce the most amount of profit possible, right? So neither of us are talking about like a grow at all costs, profit be damned scenario, right?
Yeah. Okay. And then if let's say you have the same profit number, same dollar amount, but different growth trajectories, probably the one with the better growth trajectory is going to be worth more.
Correct. Yeah.
And then assuming fixed costs are really fixed, the way to maximize profit is to maximize contribution margin.
Correct.
So I think then what we're both trying to do in either scenario, whether it's a CAC to LTV or whether it's a first purchase profitability, is you're trying to maximize contribution margin. It just depends over what time period you're looking at.
100%. Yeah. I would think about this differently if I was within 6 months of selling the business versus, and depending on how sophisticated the investor is, right? I've actually talked to a brand at one point who was on the verge of selling to an investor who was like, no, plow more money into advertising. We're not going to lower your valuation. And as it turns out, the deal fell through and they got a little bit nervous when they actually did that. So who knows? But like, it depends on how sophisticated the investor is and all those things. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. It depends on the time horizon on which you want to sell, your risk tolerance, a number of other, and crucially, the cost of capital and how much cash you have available to go do this kind of thing. That this is like a huge factor in this whole
Exactly.
thing.
And yeah, so we looked at it and we have good LTV. We don't have amazing. We have very good long tail LTV. We're not subscription, so it's not like front weighted. And we're profitable on first purchase. And we actually worked with, Taylor and CTC to help build us a model to understand what is the right balance between volume and efficiency. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And what we found, and again, partly we're still in a growth phase where we don't need to accept a lower return profile, meaning like losing or break even. Like we can still be profitable and hit our growth goals. But let's say we wanted to forecast it out where instead of maximizing contribution margin on first order, we actually try to maximize it within the year for next year. Meaning we could actually set, using their model, maximize contribution margin for after 11 months for a January cohort and after 10 months for a February cohort and on and on and on. I was a little surprised. It didn't add as much margin to the bottom line as I was expecting.
By optimizing for a longer term LTV, essentially by taking less money on first purchase. Yeah.
Exactly. It didn't. Yeah. So let's say it puts it somewhere around break even, right? Or something like that for us. It didn't add that much. It wasn't like it was adding 10% EBITDA or 10% contribution margin. It added, I don't know, honestly, but it added, not that much. And then to think about what are the downsides of that. There's potential risk. For us, it was acquiring at break even, but that break even can go negative really quickly. There's cash flow risk in there as well.
Yes.
There's always risk that the LTV that you are expecting doesn't come. That has happened to a lot of businesses, And then there's also just like the headache of growing faster. You're probably hiring more people or whatever. So for us, it didn't make sense. Yeah.
You take the LTV that doesn't come. Can you think of a brand in a scenario, and this is an honest question, this is not a gotcha question. Can you think of a scenario for somebody you've talked to, consulted with, looked at their business, whatever, where they carefully measured and forecasted their business off of cohorts, and then the cohorts were wildly less valuable than they expected?
Not if they did it carefully. I think a lot of people have did it with like a glass half full mentality. Probably maybe they looked at like a golden cohort, and obviously sometimes that degrades over time. Or maybe they forecasted in increases. Like for example, like Peloton, they used to have amazing retention during the pandemic. Right. I don't think their retention is nearly as good now. So maybe something like that. Like there is a risk that's like a black swan event. But I also see your point. I just think there is a risk to that.
Well, people have this story out there that like, but what if those cohorts don't come through? And they've heard of Andrew Chan's law of shitty cohorts, and they've heard of this idea that you forecast your cohorts and they become less valuable. But my experience from looking at a bunch of businesses is that I actually don't know. I don't have a single example of a business that carefully forecasted their cohorts. And I don't even mean that carefully. Like, I mean, just like go to Lifetimely or Shopify's, cohort forecast and look and see like by product to some degree, but just look at the blended average of cohort retention over time. I don't have an example of a business, and it probably exists, right? But relative to the way people tell this story, I think what is happening actually is two stories are being conflated into one. And so the story that I'm talking about here is like the brand that actually forecasts its cohorts relatively carefully. And then people are always worried, but what if those cohorts don't come through? What if they're not as valuable as you think they are? And I think that's possible. There's definitely some risk there, right? But on the other hand, like I think what people are doing is conflating that story, the careful measurement story, with the venture-backed story, which is the like, we raised a bunch of money, tried to grow, get a revenue multiple, whatever, and then the cohorts will become valuable over time. And we didn't really care. We just told a story. Yeah, we're going to have 100% LTV growth. We're going to introduce all these products, and people are going to buy them, and it's going to be great. Like that's a very different thing than what I'm talking about. Like, yeah, I agree, that's a bad idea. Like that doesn't really work in e-commerce. But I like this thing that like you're going to forecast your cohorts to have 100% growth over the course of a year, and they're not really going to grow. To me, is not something that I've personally seen. And I can hear Taylor Holiday in my brain going, oh, I've seen it a million times, Andrew. And he might have, I don't know, maybe he'll come on and argue with me about this. But like, I just have not, when I've seen this go wrong, it's because people aren't measuring it in the first place. It's not the problem. And this gets back to something you and I started to touch on, which is this forecasting question. Like how do you actually do that? And this is where like a good cohort-based forecast really, really goes far to answer some of these questions. But like, I think there's also risk on the other side that people undervalue. First of all, the more profit you drive today, and just be careful. Like if you're a US-based business, every dollar of profit that you drive over the course of the year, at the end of the year, you are going to give away 40% of it, right, to the government. So this is like a real thing. People do not factor this in. That money is just going to evaporate versus going and putting it into something that could actually generate this. And people are not considering that in the return calculation as they think about this bet. Now, again, that could get you into a place where you're like, oh, I never want profit or something. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying people are like, they just sort of assume that as a given, and they go like, well, that's just taxes. It's just what you got to do. But you are going to get taxed. That money is going to evaporate. It's going to disappear. And people don't factor in that risk, first of all. Secondly, they also don't factor in another thing, which is that 1 year is a completely arbitrary endpoint. It is completely arbitrary. What about 15 months from now? What about 2 years from now? Because a lot of these cohorts, while they definitely degrade over that next year, they still produce value over a longer time period. And I get that you can't probably manage cash on a 2-year basis, and all those challenges are real as well. But what I'm saying is it could lead to a kind of short-termism that I think maybe isn't actually that helpful. Third, it also assumes by only optimizing for first purchase profitability, without any more consideration. Again, what I'm really advocating for is being a little more well-rounded in the consideration, not necessarily first purchase profit.
Oh, I mean, I think we could debate this for 2 hours. Like that's how nuanced of a subject it is.
Yeah.
And I think how poor of a job Twitter does at this, because it is such a nuanced thing based on all these factors.
Yeah. But there's also byproduct value of all the clicks and awareness you drive, right? Part of the way you grow in the long term is just that, like, even if the person doesn't buy today, like there is actually additional value to your advertising spend. And you should know this, Mr. TV ad. Like there's like some element here where like, and I know you're probably measuring that on like a narrower return window than this, but like there is some real way in which, like, by spending a little more money now, you're actually producing some level of additional awareness, some level of additional clicks and video views and things like that as you're trying to grow. And it's really hard to calculate that. But this is why businesses keep growing. It's like because that stuff piles up, and now you have more touch points.
You've just got to find the balance, because there's so many businesses that have grown at the expense of. By the way, the main takeaway that I heard from that is if I ever have a business that's not profitable, I'm not going to call it not profitable. I'm just going to call it tax efficient business. You just have a tax efficient business.
Look, there could be a case for it. I'm just saying, in the right situation. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? People do this. They throw away all that money at the end of the year, and they don't consider like, oh, well, I mean, that's a real thing. You're going to give away money at the end of the year.
I think there have been mistakes made on both sides. I think there are businesses that are no longer in business because they have made the mistake of playing the CAC to LTV game, not understanding what their cohorts look like, and not focused on.
That's the key, though, Cody. They don't understand what their cohorts look like. And if you do understand what your cohorts look like, I think it's a less risky thing than people think.
I think we all live in a bubble, right?
Yeah.
I think that you are probably lucky that you've seen a lot of really good businesses, and you're able to be selective with, because of your audience and you're able to be selective with your clients. Yeah. You would be surprised at how many, I ran a poll a few months back. You'd be surprised at how many brands don't run cohort-based forecasting.
Oh, I would not be surprised. My brands are confused by it. They are, when I present it to them, it takes a lot of go over it. And some of them even say this is too complicated for me. I totally get it. Yeah.
It just takes a level of sophistication and a level of risk. And I do agree with you that for many businesses, it is the right thing to maximize contribution margin over a longer period of time. And to think about that, I would say just make sure you're maximizing contribution margin over that time period, net revenue. And then secondly, just be transparent about the risks and don't look at them, don't ignore them. That's my only point. And then figure out, is that risk reward worthwhile? For us, we are able right now, fortunately, to have some pretty solid growth without needing to take that additional risk. So that extra 10% of growth wasn't worth the risk for us. But for some brands that are more mature or are growing a little bit slower, you might have to, that might be what you have to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you're right. Like, you should also try to play the game. Like I'll just use myself. When I was running brands as a CEO and an aggregator, I did a terrible job in a lot of different ways. And one of them was I was just not clued into this stuff. And if I can go back, like, I needed to play the game on easier mode than I was playing it on, because there was just a lack of sophistication. And that's not about how good or not I am, or it's just, you just have to have a little humility, just like recognize what traps there are. And yeah, you're probably not going to get into that much trouble by like optimizing for just like having a lot of cash in the bank at a given time. It's like that stuff will really help. So I totally agree.
It depends.
It just depends on a lot of those factors.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, same thing as like personal investing. It just depends on your risk profile,
Yep.
And
Yep.
so it just depends. It really just depends what you're optimizing for. I think either can work. You just got to be like, know the downsides to each.
Yeah. It's funny I say that because I'm like, to that point, I'm like Mr. just like plow my money into an index fund, like I'm like the least risky.
Yeah.
I have like so little risk in my personal investment profile, relatively speaking.
That's so funny.
Okay. Should we talk any more about forecasting, or should we argue about direct response marketing?
Yeah, I mean, we can do forecasting. I always love to talk about it.
Go ahead.
No, honestly, it's like one of my favorite parts of the job, and it's just so important because it's how we come up with what our targets are, how much we're going to spend, what we think our returns are going to be, and we have annual. This is what I think you do a great job of. What I think CTC does a great job of is having annual budgets that are tied to actual financial metrics, P&L numbers that can really be broken down into actionable monthly, weekly, daily reporting. So for us, it's revenue is divided into new and repeat customer revenue. You look at your cohorts over time, what percentage of them buy again. You layer on your acquisition assumptions. You update it monthly based on how many customers you have acquired. You can kind of tweak your spend efficiency, and then hopefully you'll be able to have a weekly, daily, and daily metric. And again, there's a lot of metrics. I think like I don't even look a lot of times at like sessions or things like. There's just so much available in e-commerce that you can look at, and it's just like ridiculous. Like somebody asked me the other day, like how our direct traffic was doing after launching TV. I don't fucking know. Like our aMER is good, our contribution margin is good. Like obviously you have to look at that, but I think really having crystal clear KPIs versus just metrics is really important. And then so like that hierarchy that that Taylor talks about is great. Like contribution margin number one, and then MER. Like for example, we are below MER target for the month right now. In the past, we would always pull back on spend. We are cranking spend right now. We're probably 40% above forecast on spend because even though we're maybe 10% down on MER, our volume is up that much more that it's actually more contribution. So like having that hierarchy of KPIs where you know which one to ignore if they don't agree, that's important. But still having those numbers that you can kind of forecast and have a forecast versus actual. I just tweeted about this, but I really am not a fan of week over week or month over month reporting. And so I like almost everything possible to be done against forecast versus week over week or month over month. It just creates so much more accountability.
Yep. You can access better talent for your e-commerce business than you are aware of right now. And you can do that by hiring incredible e-commerce professionals who live in the Philippines. There is a symbiotic way in which this works out great for both your business and for those people in the Philippines, incredible professionals there. And that is that you can pay them better rate than what is local in the Philippines, but it will be less than hiring that same talent in the US. That is a win-win, and it will help you attract incredible talent in the Philippines. The only thing you need to do to get access to those people is have somebody who can help you find, recruit, train, onboard those folks into your business. And that is what my friends at aMER Staffing do. It is what I do with my business. I have a team in the Philippines of 4 folks who I love. They do great work, produce excellent outcomes for my clients. I love working with them. They're awesome people. And I found them through my connection with my friends at aMER Staffing. So go to morenow.co and get access to incredible talent in the Philippines. It is a gigantic win. I really mean this. I don't know why people wouldn't do this. If you are working remote already, I have no idea why you wouldn't do this. It is a gigantic win across the board, as I've said. Go to morenow.co, find incredible talent in the Philippines, get them into your business. And look, if you work with aMER Staffing and you hire somebody who doesn't work out for your business within the first year, they will actually rehire somebody else at no additional cost to you. They'll help you re-recruit, etc. It does happen. It's just like anybody else. Some hires don't work, just like anywhere. It happens rarely, but it does happen, and they give you a guarantee for 1 year on people they put into your place in your business. So there's really no risk to you to hiring that person. Go to morenow.co, tell them I sent you. It will help your business. Yeah, it actually, as you're talking, what it makes me think about is that in some way, the forecast almost doesn't have to be that good. Like I'm a big cohort forecast guy. If you go sign up for my email list on my website, it's like the lead magnet is like 4 free e-commerce resources. And one of them is like the walkthrough from Lightspeed Venture Partners of how to do a cohort forecast and the whole breakdown, like all that stuff. I'm a big fan of Dave Recook's CXL forecasting course.
Yeah,
Like those
his
things
is great.
are
That's how I got started.
right. Yeah. And he's just a good teacher. He understands it really well. Like those things are really, really useful. I'll link down the show notes too, just for people to go get it. But like and it's a good place to start. It's funny. I did 2 CXL courses before Dave did his, and I recommend his way more than I recommend mine. I think this is so good. So I
I
like
didn't know
never
you
talk
had
about
one.
mine. Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't need them. It's fine. Somebody might find them useful. I don't know, but yeah. But go get Dave's forecasting course before you do any of mine. But actually, to your point, in some way or another, simply measuring some kind of forecast that includes an OPEX forecast. So like a fixed cost forecast, basically. Sometimes people put CAC into OPEX, but I mean, in the sense, like just fixed costs, SG&A, that kind of thing, mixed in with a model of revenue and spend, revenue COGS and spend, basically. If you have some basic P&L forecast like that, even if it isn't perfect, honestly, even if it isn't done that great, what it will force you to do is like ask questions about where money is going in your business. And my experience of like sort of building everything and measuring off of a forecast for accountability is that it just puts all of the information that is required in your face. It makes it really, really hard to ignore important things, and also makes it really easy to see quickly if you have a prayer of success relative to what you're trying to do. Like if you need to triple your ad spend at your same efficiency for your forecast to have profit on the bottom line, I have news for you. It's like probably not a good way to think about what's going to happen on your business. You probably need to cut costs, like it's just, there's things like that where just doing something like that and then measuring according to that and holding that accountable is really, really helpful. So I'm a big fan of the cohort model, but I think even if you don't quite get to there, yeah, like it's just a really, really useful thing. How does your team use yours? Like, or is it mostly just you, executive team? Like, how does it make its way operationally through the business?
That's a really good question. So I do ours. I'm lucky we have a very unique org structure where I actually have finance reporting to me. And so I'm a
Huh.
big fan because like before we kind of did this and we had like a separate org structure, like they were very separate. We had very different things. So we had like a marketing forecast and then like, ops team, finance team would have like a separate way that they were looking at things. So I meet with our demand planning team, so our ops team and our demand planning team, just to like compare notes and plan and see if we're seeing different things to obviously make sure we have inventory. We're trying to have the demand plan be higher because we want to have inventory on the high side, but we just kind of check balances there. That creates like a summary of a P&L summary, but it's like very directional. But I really, again, what I care about is, contribution margin mainly. And I kind of give that to our director of finance and kind of built out like, a more thorough P&L. So we have that there. We kind of lock that annually. We just have that set. That's our budget that we present to the board annually. But our forecast changes monthly. So we'll look at how we did the month prior to it. There are certain things that are inputs. There are certain things that are outputs. We'll input our spend. We'll input our aMER. That'll output our CAC, number of new customer goals. And again, we have, monthly, daily, really it's annually, monthly, daily, or weekly, and then daily goals for that. So we'll get a total spend, right? Total revenue, contribution margin, like all of our main KPIs. We'll get a new customer revenue, repeat customer revenue, and number of new customers. And now we can take that and give that to various teams, right? We have a growth team and, I will give them, here's how much we're spending. Right now, we don't have a director of growth. I'm functioning as director of growth. We kind of work on that together, like myself and the team. We kind of figure out where we want to split. So say we're trying to spend 100K a day. Hey, we want 70% on Meta, 5% on TikTok, whatever it is, this percent on Google TV, whatever it is. We will split that, and then we'll have a daily forecast of each one. We just have it automatically pulled into a Google Sheet. This is what we want to spend a day. This is what we did. It's all conditional formatted, color coded. And we kind of look on total, right? You've got to look on what you spent total, but then you've also got to look at it on a channel level and kind of what's your mix. Yeah, it just gets really operationalized and everybody on the team knows, how you're optimizing things. If contribution margin is great and aMER is down, well, you can push. And then also when it comes to kind of deciphering spend between channels, here's how we look to get our blended results the best we want. So yeah, it's just kind of the team. The first thing we do when we wake up, we look at total spend, contribution margin, all that stuff. And then right next to that, we have a sheet that has all of our channel spend right next to it. Again, I don't even look at channel ROAS. It's just channel spend. And we can see if we need to pull or cut back anywhere.
Yeah, that's so helpful. That's really, really awesome. Let me ask you a question about that level of detail. Go back to Cody and Jones Road at a as a $5 million business. What of that would you tell that Cody that he should have in place? And what of that is unnecessary at that stage to have in place, etc.?
So good. Such a good question. Yeah, I think what we did at that stage, that's when we were like first just getting into like MER, and we just had like an MER target, and it was just, that was like to me like step one, better than nothing, better than like Facebook ROAS. It's just like, hey, you know your MER
Yep.
target that gives you
Yep.
the profit that you want. And again, we're looking mainly at percentages now, and hit that, and spend more if you're more efficient than that, spend less if you're less efficient. So that's like step one. Then step two, you kind of got to start looking at new versus returning customers. I think you've got to cohort forecast that, but if not, whatever, however you do it, I think that's aMER because it gives you a little bit more sensitivity. A really good repeat customer revenue day or month could mask for poor acquisition performance if you're just going off MER. And then I think step three is getting the contribution margin. Those are like, to me, like the levels of it.
Yeah. So you think yes to a daily forecast at 5 million, like a daily spend revenue forecast? It's something I don't have a clear answer here. I just go back and forth about this.
I wouldn't be the best person to ask because it's just
It's been a while.
I don't know. It's been a while, fortunately. Definitely monthly and maybe weekly, maybe weekly.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. I like weekly at that stage because I think there's too much noise on a day-to-day basis. Like it requires you to really massively forecast the difference between like day of the week effects on spend, especially if you're running cost controls. Like suddenly all your weekends need to be bigger, your weekdays need to be lower, whatever. And most of the, my brands are all they're all sub 20 million right now, I think. Yeah. And I think one of them might hit 15 this year. I think it will hit 15 this year. So yeah, but I just play in that pool a lot more. So that's my favorite stage of business. It's who I tend to work with. I love working with entrepreneurs who are in the sort of like mid 7 figures and can push into 20 plus. And like that part of the journey is my favorite. So I think about this a lot for those kinds of people because that's who my clients mostly are. And I tend to think that like down to the level of daily forecasting actually isn't that helpful for those brands because there's too much statistical noise on a day-to-day basis. And so it will actually kind of lead to a sort of short-termism that is not really the way that those clients actually can move forward. Instead, what they, I think, mostly need to do is actually take bigger swings less often and not worry so much about that. So weekly kind of keeps you tied to your forecast. I mean, you can see what's going on, but then it's like, okay, the way that you take a giant step forward, like imagine a $6 million apparel brand, they need to figure out how to like produce more product drops and have bigger sale moments and stuff. They don't need to send another email today. At some point, they need to build a process where they send more emails every week, sure. But like it's less about that. It's like the way they're going to really move forward is like by producing their next hit sweater for somebody to buy or whatever, And so I don't know. So I go back and forth, but I mean, either way, I think the point's actually the same, which is that like having some kind of clear measurement goal with a good forecast in place, it's fairly robust, really gets far. And then
it's just a goal and a plan. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a goal and a plan. And the way I look at it is really, we want to land for the month, right? Like we want to hit our targets for the month. I don't think you have to hit your targets every week, right? I think if you have you can have one bad week if it's not awful. You don't have to hit it, right? If you have 2 bad weeks, it's going to be really tough. And same thing for a week, right? We then want to hit our targets for a week. You can have some red days, right? And because we have conditional format, you can have 2 bad days. If you have 3 bad days in a row, it's going to be really hard to hit a week.
That's right.
So I don't think you should be doing, especially not to turn this into a bid cap or cost cap thing, but you really shouldn't be doing that much on a daily basis in terms of spend and bids. You just want to monitor it and look at the pacing of it.
Yeah.
And understand what I love, because I'm very visual, is like we have a chart. I posted this on Twitter. We have a chart. It's just like a line graph, and you see pacing versus actual. And like I just really want to know how we're pacing. And I think that even helps. That visualization helps because let's say we have a bad day or two, then I can go look and say, hey, we're pacing fine. Like that gives me the confidence to not touch anything. Hey, this is part of the plan. Sometimes we're going to miss high. Sometimes we're going to miss low. Versus if I didn't have that zoomed out view, then you can be a little bit too in the weeds and be like, oh shit, we're not efficient yesterday. We got to cut back. But I agree with you. You shouldn't, whether you track daily or not, you should very rarely be touching things daily.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So what I end up doing is a lot of weekly forecasting. And one of the things I do to the earlier conversation about the returning customer conversation is that like one of the ways I think you mitigate against the risk of bad cohorts is by having that forecast in place, and then by forecasting new and returning customer revenue. I mean, if you are trying to make an LTV based play, you must forecast and measure your cohorts if you have any mentality around that, right? So that's like a you absolutely should not go spend at a loss on first purchase without forecasting your cohorts carefully. Like that's just like the risk for disaster, or it's the recipe for disaster. I mean, so one of the things that we do a lot is we'll look at new customer revenue versus spend. Really three key metrics: spend, new customer revenue, and then returning customer revenue relative to forecast. And we see those separately, because what you'll see sometimes, like, oh, our spend is a little low this week, new customers are a little low this week, but returning customer revenue is high. Okay, that means that we got to go fix our spend, but our returning customer revenue, no big deal. So it just isolates where the problem in the business is versus the other thing, right? Oh, we might have over forecasted returning customer revenue. And I have a business that I coach right now that has shown me back-to-back weeks of returning customer revenue coming in at 80% of expectation. This is a business that acquires at a loss. They have massive LTV. And to their credit, they're immediately turning around and going, okay, what happened there? How do we solve it? And they've isolated the problem. It's very clear what the problem is, and it'll solve it. They'll be okay. And that will eliminate the risk of like that kind of issue. And so just seeing those things on, again, day-to-day, week-to-week kind of basis, I think goes really, really far. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I would be lost without it.
Yeah. I don't think we have
time.
No,
I'm just saying I would be lost without it.
I don't think we have time to argue about direct response today. Should we save it?
What do we got? 7 minutes?
Yeah. Okay. You want to do it?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. So let's steer the conversation. You tweeted yesterday or a couple days ago or whatever that, what was the tweet? It was like, direct response is bad and Andrew's an idiot. I think that was the tweet.
Yeah, it was something like that. I think that was like word for word. No, I said I am so grateful for my direct response background and everything it taught me, but it's a terrible way to build a business in 2024. And
okay, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Before I try to argue with you.
Yeah. So first, all right, when I say direct response, like my definition of direct response, like the way I learned marketing was like very hardcore, like info product stuff. If you're familiar with like Dan Kennedy, Gary Halbert, John Carlton, things like that, like a lot of like direct mail, sales letters, very hard hitting stuff. Right. And so the way this tweet came to me, I was spending time with my creative strategist and I was going over market awareness and market sophistication and some like breakthrough advertising things. And that is what I'm incredibly grateful for. I think that stuff is not talked about enough, the difference between market awareness and sophistication and just like how you message to prospects in different stages of a customer journey, or based on how savvy the market is for that thing. Like I don't find that often in e-com or even in brand stuff. So I think that stuff is extremely important. However, I went to go and buy her the Breakthrough Advertising book, and it's just got all of these upsells and things like that. And I could just like feel my heart pounding. And I'm like, it's just like an emotionally manipulative way to treat customers. And I think it can be great for acquiring customers and doing things like that. I just think it is very short-sighted, and you don't see that many very large direct response businesses. And again, I mean true direct response. I'm not talking like the watered down like TikTok UGC where they say it's direct response that like it's not, where it's like you've got like a limited time. Like most direct response is borderline FTC violations, right? It's like you've got these limited time offers that aren't actually limited time offers and you're making it like shut up. And I just think consumers, first of all, it is limited, but I also think right now, or a while ago when a lot of these things were happening before the internet, and consumers didn't have as much information, so they didn't have as much leverage. Now consumers have so much information, so much leverage, that I think it's so much harder to build a business that way. And it just seems like an exhausting way for me to do it. So that's my take.
Yeah. Okay. We have a sad thing here, which is that upon clarification, I mostly agree with you. The reason that I replied to your tweet and said, this is wrong, let's argue about it, is because I think that when I think of direct response, what I think of is carefully crafted messaging and offers, and also measuring success doggedly. And so it actually dovetails with the conversation we were having earlier about forecasting, which is like part of the reason I think people even resist something like cost caps or bid caps is because they just refuse to be frustrated by the waste that is happening in their ad accounts. They're not frustrated enough about that. And they're not frustrated enough by watching money get burned on places because they're just kind of supposed to be spending. And so what I love about the direct response people, and like, when you read Ogilvy on advertising, which everybody should read, like it's great, is, this mentality of like good marketing sells product. And that basic idea, like, and, for Ogilvy, he was saying, I don't care if I win a marketing award. It doesn't matter to me if my campaign wins awards. What matters to me is the recent example with Snoop Dogg and Solo Stove, like you could say a lot about whether or not that was a good campaign or whether it will work out for them in the long term. And I don't have a view to the metrics. I have no idea, like whatever. Right. But some mentality around it got a lot of people's attention, but the success of it is based on whether or not it actually produced long-term value for the business. Whatever time horizon you want to measure that to me is like the key thing. And so the direct response people, what I like about them is they just care so much about getting that right. And sometimes what that means, especially for businesses that don't have much LTV, is they don't rest on their laurels and they just go crazy trying to sell you more products. Like I was talking recently with a friend about a business that is like, the business is like 60 points of landed margin. So like decent, but not incredible or anything like that. Almost no LTV, and is growing at this like insane rate. And they're up to like $200 million in revenue per year, up from like 100 the year before and 40 the year before and 10 the year before. Like just a 4-year path to 200 million. And they're playing the game on hard, right? Like they're by not having much LTV, not having that. And the reason why they're able to do it is because like all they care about is just like selling more product to people. That is it. And so it's just like any channel they can get, if they can, and they are really careful about measurement. They're really certain. Don't forget, like Gary Halbert and David Ogilvy, they were telling you that you must measure all of these things, like in a world where that was so freaking hard because it meant counting receipts or like counting coupons used, like I just like think about David Ogilvy in 1960, whatever, telling people to measure the results and then respond by measurement. That was like a 5-month feedback loop, probably, I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, so that's the reason I like it. And I think that is really useful. And actually I've kind of been pushing it myself recently to say like, Andrew, you have to care more about building funnels that sell product and like, think harder. I just released, I think probably the episode that'll come out right before this one is about offers. And it's just like, it's a very kind of DR way to think, but like, that was my pushback is like that stuff. I
guess it's technically direct response. I mean, I guess you're right. Like if you go by the book definition, what you're describing is direct response, Athletic Greens or Mudwater having a gift with purchase, right. But there's no, like, you have to buy now. Like, yeah, that's technically direct response. Like we do that stuff. I don't know how, maybe I just call it hardcore direct response, like the click funnels and breakthrough advertising and that kind of stuff. So that was more what I'm referring to. But yeah, I mean, I guess, because I care about brand, but I care about brand in a way that it produces contribution margin. Like, let's say TV ads where Bobby's on TV and really the only offer is shop now at Jones Road Beauty on an end card. What we're measuring, however, the best we can, the effect of those channels. Is that direct response? Is that brand? Is it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
what do you think?
If it says buy now, then it's performance marketing, right? If there's a CTA, that's like the rule of thumb. But I agree with you because it is producing brand value. It's Bobby on TV talking about makeup, like that's, or like beauty supply, right? So to me, like that is conveying something about the brand, and I think that's like taking brand as secondary, as like a part of the direct response package is really important. And there may be a point where like the business gets big enough to where you actually take longer, bigger swings that are more about brand awareness and measure it on eyeballs and some of that kind of stuff. But I just think most brands like So I think
listen, did $100 million last year. We don't measure anything on eyeballs,
right. Right.
So if an agency or media buy reported to me on impressions, they'd be fired day one. Like we're looking at CPA, but we're trying to weave that into reaching new people, and that's debatable, as Taylor would say. And the worst part about this is Taylor and I have been debating TV and top of funnel and definition on Twitter. I opened up TikTok last night. I see him on TikTok. I see him on Instagram today doing reels about it. So it's all over the place.
Yeah, well, it's always fun to argue with Taylor. It's one of my favorite sports is arguing with Taylor. Yeah, the other thing I'll say about direct response, that the reason that I think that not enough people, the direct response people, pay very close and careful attention to the structure of their messaging in their ads. And so they have these like formats and frameworks they use. I was actually just passing one along from Alex Hormozi the other day. And like, I'm annoyed the same way you are about all the upsells in Alex Hormozi's, books or whatever. And I'm not like a big Hormozi guy or whatever. I've barely interacted with his content actually, but I found one little framework he had about like, the belief breaker framework or whatever. And it's really helpful. It was just like a really helpful way to organize thinking. And so much bad advertising is because nobody's thinking about a true structure and framework for their messaging. And that's what I love about direct response people is they are
more people need to think about unique mechanism. Not enough people in e-commerce think about
what I don't know what that is.
So a unique mechanism, this is how I've been described, but most people in your market have tried other things before. So most people are problem aware, but they're not necessarily solution aware, right? And a lot of times they are not solution aware because they've tried other things, and they're actually reverse solution aware because they've tried other things that are similar and it hasn't
Okay,
worked.
I see where
And
this
so
is going. Yeah, this is great.
in order for somebody to purchase from you, they have to believe that it's going to work for them, right? And obviously you can do, free shipping and or free returns and exchanges and things like that. But really you have to make them believe that it's going to
There's
work
a
for them.
unique mechanism. Yeah.
And exactly. And so that's how it is different. And so the best example I can give, let's say somebody has tried to lose weight and you told them you have to work super hard and do it, like they're gonna be like, oh, that's not gonna work. Like I'm not that person. But if you told them it was super easy and all they had to do is this one thing, and what you don't want to say is better. You don't want to say what we have is better. You want to create, like Russell Brunson calls it, like a unique vehicle, like a different vehicle, and you want to make it very different. The best example I can think of is P90X. If you're familiar with that, like workout program,
Yeah.
the unique mechanism was muscle confusion. And so Tony Horton in the infomercials goes into this long thing about how you just need to shock your body and muscle confusion, and that's the thing that you were missing before. And so it's taking the features of your product and turning that into creating a compelling story for why somebody's going to succeed with it. That's like the most important thing.
Okay, I did not know that phrase, but it's
Uh-huh.
so helpful. I totally remember that muscle confusion thing too. I just did an episode with Dave Recook where we did a couple hours. It's long, but we basically tried to craft a long form explainer ad together live. And one of the things I was struggling with as we were talking, and I actually wonder if this ad's going to work very well because I didn't name it that, is that I wasn't sure if I got to what now I would call, thanks to you, or Russell Brunson would call, or whatever, unique mechanism, because I was looking at their product going like, and I even know that product decently well because I was, basically ran that business at one point,
Yeah.
but like still like was going like, what is the thing that we're saying that is uniquely good about this product? And I was sort of struggling to get at it. And I think what you're saying there is right. I actually did another episode a long time ago, and I'll link both these in show notes. And I was trying to get at this without calling it that as well, but basically saying like, what I know is that most founders that I'm aware of, when they built their business and when they built their brand, they're not shysters, they're not snake oil salesmen. They really care about their products. They built them, they want to serve their customers. Like I know very few people in our space who are just trying to turn a quick buck. And so that means that in the product formulation or creation process or whatever, product development process, they made a series of decisions. And they made a series of decisions based on sometimes years of testing and years of playing with the product or whatever. And those decisions were there in order to make the product great and to serve the customer. And so the way I frame this sometimes is like, listen, if you're the founder of the business, all I'm asking you to do in your advertising is tell people about those decisions that you made. And what you're saying, unique mechanism, is a good way to frame that. Is like, that's right. You should go and just whatever those things are that you did that are different than other products and the reason you created yours, just tell people about it and put
And
that into your
it's how are
messaging.
you uniquely different, but
Right.
also why is that important for getting the
Yeah.
outcome?
Right. But the reason the person made the decision is because it is important. So tell them both. Exactly. Right. So tell them we added this ingredient because it accomplishes X.
Hexclad is a great example.
Perfect
Yeah, exactly.
example.
Or
Perfect
Hexclad,
example.
the Hexes does that exactly. And
Yeah.
what I can say is we've tested and we put unique mechanism in the first 5 seconds of all our ads now. It's just like that important for us. And
That's
that's
what is
what we
yours?
found the most success with. It depends on the product, but I mean, we have a
Yeah.
very similar customer base to that. But it's like for foundation, hey, a lot of traditional foundations, don't work if they leave you feeling heavy and cakey. It's because of this. Here's the moisturizing ingredients we put in ours, which actually makes it feel like skincare and doesn't produce that look. So that's it for foundation. We have a similar one for Miracle Bomb, but it's just what is unique about the features of your product that gives the intended outcome in a way that does it better than what else is on the market. Especially,
Yeah.
it's really important if you're in a competitive market like beauty or something like that. If you're the first selling something, it's not really important. Like Matt from Lomi doesn't really have to do that because you're
Right.
not comparing it to
That's
something
right.
else. Because that's what Eugene Schwartz would call a unsophisticated market. It's the first time they've heard this claim. But yeah, if you're selling supplements, like you've got to be clear why you are so different than what else is out there and what they've tried before.
It's really, really good. Dude, this is great. I think it's a really good conversation. We need to figure out a way to make this some kind of regular thing. This is great. Okay, so I'm going to link to in the show notes a bunch of stuff we talked about here, including Ogilvy on advertising, including Breakthrough Advertising, Eugene Schwartz, who you just mentioned. Those will be there. Those are just books to go get. They're great. Anything else that you want to point people to related to this conversation or just to get that good Cody Plofker content?
No, I mean, hit me up on Twitter, and to get some of these hot takes, you can see Andrew and I disagreeing about those more on Twitter because we didn't really disagree here. And then just follow me on Twitter, subscribe to my newsletter, and I hope this helps some people.
Okay, great. I think this is really good. This is almost like 3 separate episodes. I'm gonna keep it as one, but I may even just like cut these up into something really good. That's good. People are gonna like it. Okay, we're gonna try and get you to the top 2 spots, Cody. Thanks for making the effort. Appreciate it, man.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks,
Peace.
man.
I loved that conversation. You could probably hear it in my voice. That unique mechanism comment was great. The forecasting stuff we're getting to. Cody's a smart dude, and I was really helped by that conversation a lot. And so I hope you were as well. You should subscribe to this show if that was helpful to you. Cody and I immediately were talking about trying to do some more stuff together at some point, and I've got all kinds of great stuff coming down the pipe, great interviews like that one. I just think there's a bunch of stuff that you're going to like, including a couple more solo episodes coming soon, a couple of great interviews on the books. It's good. Just subscribe. Get all this stuff. You're going to like it. I promise. If this was helpful to you, also, don't forget to share it with somebody for whom it will also be helpful. That is the number one thing you can do if you like my podcast and want to be a little bit helpful to me. Hopefully I can be helpful to not only you, but your friends. And in turn, that helps me grow my show, which I really appreciate. And of course, ratings and reviews always really do help. If you've got a second to go stop on Spotify or Apple or whatever and hit that 5 stars, that would be great. If you would like to give me any feedback, please do that at Andrew J. Ferris on Twitter. And how else? ajfgrowth.com. That's my email. That's my website. Go there. There is, as I mentioned on the show, some resources there that are going to be useful to you. Just go sign up for my email list. You can get those. I don't even really send emails yet, so I won't even spam you. It's just, probably a good idea for me to have that. And then, of course, you can email me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com. Don't forget, if you are trying to grow your brand and need to add members to your team, to go to my friends at aMER Staffing. Virtual assistants can be helpful. Virtual professionals can change your business. Go hire incredible e-commerce talent from the Philippines with my friends at aMER Staffing by going to morenow.co. They are great. You will like them, and I use them personally in my business. That is everything for today. Thanks again so much for listening, for watching. All the links from today's episode are in the show notes. I'll see you next time.